It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from London, Nico Hines, world editor of The Daily Beast. How are you?
I'm very well. Good evening.
All right. Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris correspondent for Portuguese magazine Visão, is with us as well.
Very good.
How are things?
Very well, and you?
Not so bad. Not so bad. Richard Verly, Paris correspondent for Swiss newspaper Le Temps.
Nice to see you again,
Nice to see you, Richard. And from Geneva, Jamil Shad, correspondent for Brazilian news portal UOL. Welcome back to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. Europe in 8 days for his first foreign tour as U.S. President Joe Biden storming the beaches of Cornwall Thursday in the company of his host Boris Johnson and their respective spouses.
Both married way above our station. I'm not going to dissent from that one. But I'm not going to disagree with the president there, or indeed on anything else.
Nico Hines, you're not going to disagree with Joe Biden on anything either?
It seems that's the entire plan. It's funny, the Americans have mapped out a plan for this entire trip, which, when you think about it, couldn't be more significant. It's like G7 and NATO and EU and face-to-face with Putin. And yet, all they're trying to achieve is to tell people that they're the good guys again and that we should forget about mean old Donald Trump. But I'm afraid that's not good enough. We want to hear some real policies and how he's going to help improve things.
Yeah, we got a sense of that with even with Jill Biden wearing the outfit that she wore on Thursday, which was clearly a signal to Melania Trump.
Yeah, it's really kind of basic. But I mean, look, I suppose it's welcome, and I just don't think it shows that they've done enough homework, you know. Although, let's see what they come up with. I mean, you know, some of these proposals do sound pretty good. They're talking about 1 billion doses of the vaccine to be sent around the world. When you look at the small print, perhaps it's not quite as good as it sounds. I think Britain, for example, is saying it's going to give 100 million, but when you actually look at the details, only 5 million of those are going to be going to the places that need the most by September. So a lot of it's going to end up being smoke and mirrors, as always, I fear.
All right, too much smoke and mirrors, you say, too much nice guy. Joe Biden, who played good cop 1 week after an astonishing dressing down of the British, as read out in person to Boris Johnson's Brexit minister, David Frost, by what's effectively Biden's interim ambassador, Yael Lempert. The Times of London getting a hold of UK government minutes of the meeting, accusing Johnson of inflaming tensions over Ireland and jeopardizing the Good Friday Agreement. Frost was told of Biden's grave concern over his stance in a tense encounter at which Lempert was said to have, quote, slowly and gravely read her instructions from Washington aloud. Ana Navarro Pedro.
Yes.
Joe Biden, who identifies as Irish, weighing in on the trade dispute over what happens with Northern Ireland as signed in the post-Brexit trade deal. It's being called the sausage war.
Yes, and I believe Number 10 hasn't, it's not very well known lately for doing their homework. So they didn't probably know that Joe Biden is so fiercely proud of his Irish ancestry, and that the second most powerful lobby in Washington is the American Irish lobby, just next to the Israeli lobby or Jewish lobby. So, you know, if they had put one and one together, they would have come up maybe with some smoother path. And don't forget that some time ago, Boris Johnson was just saying that he would break international law regarding Northern Ireland border agreement, the agreement with the European Union. So if you topple that with the fact that Biden gave some lessons to Boris Johnson on good manners, greeting his wife first, for instance, well, things are not going as smoothly as Number 10 might expect.
Not as smoothly, Richard Verly? I mean, we've seen it's just been so carefully stage managed, and there hasn't
I do not think Biden wants any confrontation with the Europeans at large. He may kind of rebuff Boris Johnson a bit on Ireland and on other matters, but the main confrontation day would be next Wednesday when he meets with Putin. So he needs to save his energy for that, and he needs to secure his allies first when he will meet them in Brussels before he goes to Geneva seeing the Russian president. So I would expect smooth Biden for the days to come and stronger Biden to come up next Wednesday.
A stronger Biden to come next Wednesday. If Boris Johnson, by the way, fails to charm Irish Joe, the perfidious Albion always has that time-honored ace in the hole, Her Majesty the Queen, who will have met all but one U.S. president dating back to 1952. She was still Princess Elizabeth in that picture with Harry Truman. Sunday's rollout of the carpet at the red carpet at Windsor Castle, her first major outing on the world stage since the death of her husband, Prince Philip. Jamil Shad, an audience with the Queen, it seems to be so important each time.
Absolutely. And in this honeymoon trip, it is one that obviously the world looks at Biden as someone that will reestablish some kind of cooperation with Europeans, multilateralism. All of that will be obviously, let's say, in the I would say in the fine lines of this trip. But as Mr. Velli just mentioned, it may not be the full story of this trip. This trip does include Geneva with a very different story. Now, for the first part, as you said, meeting with the Queen, reestablishing this transatlantic relationship is basically a signal to the world that, yes, the U.S. is back, but it is back with its traditional allies. The big question is not the relationship with Europe, but basically what will this relationship forge in terms of the relationship with Russia, but most of all with China.
Most of all with China. Nico Hines, is that what this is all about?
Well, it is very interesting. There's a real difference between the way Europe and particularly Britain as well sees China and the way that the US does. You know, if you listen to Joe Biden's domestic speeches at the moment, they're all about China. Everything he's doing, every bit of spending he's proposing for American schools is so that we can compete with China on the global stage. And to be honest, you know, there was a big falling out with Britain when Britain tried to allow Huawei to build the 5G networks over here, and the US eventually twisted their arm behind the scenes and made them back away from that deal. And Britain is closer to the US, at least on Russia, where Britain is.
But hang on, Nico. On the issue,
Russia.
Nico, on the issue of China, we've seen Britain dispatching a fleet of warships to the Pacific. Is that a sign to China or a sign to the US?
That's a good question. I think it's both. I mean, Britain wants to establish itself as a player on the world stage, but the truth is it doesn't really have the economic power to make much difference in China. But what it is very keen to do is to cozy up to the US again. So I would look at everything it does towards China and Russia in those terms, and that's where Britain is still closer to the US than the rest of Europe because, you know, if we look at like Nord Stream 2, for example, Europe doesn't seem to have too many problems doing all kinds of deals with the Russians that the Americans are very disapproving of.
Biden will no doubt be briefed on topics to avoid, by the way, when he travels to Windsor Castle, like the Queen's new great-granddaughter's name, Lilibeth Diana, and whether Harry and Meghan did or did not ask her before choosing that name as a child. There you see the headline the other day in the Daily Mail, Sussex's War on the BBC. That's because the BBC said that Prince Harry did not ask his grandmother if it was okay to use that name. The Daily Beast quotes palace sources which stand by the story that they told the BBC. They made it very clear the very specific story is correct as far as they're concerned, Nico Hines.
Yeah, I mean, this row just won't go away. It's amazing. You have to say that Harry and Meghan do seem willing to keep this row in the news, which is surprising in a way. I'm not talking about whether they're right or wrong, but they're definitely willing to up the ante when they think they're being maltreated. It's no longer a case of grinning and bearing it and perhaps allowing anonymous sources to drip feed a kind of comeback story a few weeks later. When something happens now that appears in the press that they don't like, they are straight out of the gate denying it, and then within hours, we found out this week, sending legal letters to other publications that if they followed that story up, there was going to be legal trouble. And that is just something that the royal family has never done before. It used to be the preserve of Russian oligarchs who didn't like business stories in the Financial Times, but these young royals, or shall I say young former royals, are not going to back down once they've had this Oprah moment. They are now all guns blazing.
All right, so we'll see if the photo ops stay on script on Sunday. The G7 in Cornwall, about more than photo ops, as we've already mentioned. This is one that counts. The leaders of the 7 industrialized nations all present in person for the first time since COVID. The summit preceded by some vaccine brinkmanship, with the United States firing the first salvo with that announcement of a 500 million dose purchase for the developing world.
America will be the arsenal of vaccines in our fight against COVID-19, just as America was the arsenal of democracy during World War II.
Vaccines, Jamil Shad, your thoughts on the language used there?
Absolutely. But let's be clear here. 1 billion doses, as they are basically planning for the G7, may not be enough still to immunize, basically to fight against the pandemic in the developing world. Basically, 1 billion means 500 million people, and that's not even the population, for example, of Africa, not even counting Asia and Latin America. It is, above all, an element of power. It is, above all, an element of diplomacy by Mr. Biden, obviously arriving a bit late. Now, it's a bit hypocritical, to be honest, when you have already vaccinated most of your population, when basically the distribution, the equal distribution around the world did not happen in an equal way. Only after all of this has happened, then finally the G7 is ready to distribute vaccines. A bit late. Many lives were lost.
But in fairness, if you're the leader of a country and you've got this crisis, don't you first want to take care of your own and then open it up?
Well, this is one of the arguments, but let's think two different aspects here. First, why do you have to vaccinate your youngsters when actually in many countries doctors and the elderly are not being vaccinated? So this is the first element of this story. This distribution, it basically shows to the world that once again, the disparity is blunt. So this is the first point. The second point is about the variants. The longer it takes for developing countries to vaccinate their own people with vaccines from China, India, Russia, or the US, the more likely it is for a new variant to show up. And this new variant, so far, they are being dealt by the vaccines. But what if a new variant appears and it basically dribbles the role of vaccines that we have today? Once again, countries who have already vaccinated 70, 60, 50% of the population will find out that, well, now the new variant is the new challenge. So it is of their self-interest to distribute these vaccines. It is not an element of generosity only. It is an element of basically being safe, because no one will be safe.
Okay, so let me add to that. The IMF has done some number crunching, Ana Navarro Pedro, and they say that to get 70% of the planet vaccinated by April, an ambitious goal, but to do it by next April, it would cost some $50 billion. The benefit, though, would be $9 trillion. And this is not even talking about the lives saved. $9 trillion by the year 2025. So let's ask Jamil's question there. Why not do it if it's in self-interest?
Why are we? Why is the West giving the G7 making a gift of leftover vaccines to the rest of the world? Why giving fish to the one who are hungry? Why not let them learn how to fish for themselves? Meaning to produce their own vaccines, because there is hypocrisy, as it was said before. We don't know how many vaccines will reach actually the needed in other continents. UNICEF in India is already seeing what is going to happen. They say if you are sending all your leftovers because they are next to expiry date and sending them all of at the same time, and if we don't have the infrastructure to start giving the jabs, it will be just waste that you are sending away, and that you will have to deal with because they won't be good for vaccinating. So there are many things. There is an announcement. We are very generous. It looks like, before in the old days when the rich ones would give the leftovers of their food to the poor ones on the street. I mean, it's really, really, really poor democracy and poor diplomacy here.
And we did hear France dropping its objection to that vaccine patent waiver that you were alluding to, Ana Navarro Pedro. But let's listen to the head of the European Council on that one.
The question of intellectual property rights will likely be raised in this context. A patent waiver might sound good, but it's no silver bullet.
Richard Verly, how do you explain that?
Europeans are clearly afraid of losing, let's say, economic advantage. They are afraid of seeing big American, let's say, pharmaceutical company or big conglomerate financed by American money taking over the world market. So there is competition here between European pharmaceutical company and American too. But I'd like to come back on what was said on generosity, and there I would disagree. This is politics. You may consider that this is shameful, that it is not normal, but it's been politics from the very beginning. China has used the vaccine to play a political role towards Africa and other countries. Russia has used its own vaccine to do the same. So there is absolutely no surprise that now Biden is doing it this way. So let's not expect an outburst of generosity because this is a pandemic. This pandemic is seen by many governments as an opportunity either to promote themselves as sponsor of, let's say, sponsor of the world, sponsor of relief, and other government will try to influence through vaccine. The big losers at the moment, and I link it to the fact that the EU is refusing to waive this patent, it's because the big losers are European companies, and Europeans feel that they need to remain in the competition, even if it doesn't appear so good to other part of the world.
I want to pick up on this point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Nico Hines, world editor of The Daily Beast, is with us from London. Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris correspondent for Portuguese news magazine Visão. We're also in the company of Richard Verly, Paris correspondent for Swiss newspaper Le Temps. And from Geneva, Jamil Shad, columnist for news portal UOL. Just before the break, you were saying, Richard Verly, how the European Union dragging its feet on this patent waiver for vaccines. And there is this problem the EU seems to always have, and that they've given the most doses for the developing world so far. And yet, with statements like the one we heard from Charles Michel, public relations-wise, they look the worst.
Well, once again, there is a big economic competition going on as far as the vaccine is concerned. The EU has lost, let's say, during this last month, it has been late giving vaccine to its people. It has been quite late producing the vaccine. So I believe within the European Union, the 27 member countries, and especially the main member countries, are quite concerned that they should not waive this patent, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult for European pharmaceutical company to remain in the top league. The big difference, I would say something. Don't forget, the reason some company like Moderna, for example, managed to produce vaccine is because the amount of money that the Americans were able to put on the table from the very beginning. European Union was not able to make that, so now they are trying to protect their market. It's economy stupid.
Let me ask you, if we're talking about the economy, this G7 preceded by this grand announcement that there's going to be this 15% minimum global tax for corporations. How do they feel about it in your native Switzerland?
They're trying to think of ways of, let's say, adapting. Clearly, Switzerland has a very good advantage to propose to multinational companies wanting to come there: security, neutrality, and so on. So I believe that the next promotion campaign by the Swiss government will be to tell to those multinational companies, will probably in the long term adopt the new 15% tax rate. But in between, first of all, will be slow, and second, we remind you that you have a safe, neutral country to welcome you.
Nico Heinz, is this already a nothing burger, since we've seen already there are countries asking for exemptions like the UK for financial services in the City of London?
Well, it remains to be seen. These things will come down to the very details. And yeah, if they do give carve-outs to the City of London, for example, who want to spare the massive banking industry and the financial services industry in this city, then obviously it will be turned to nothing. I think, certainly the markets and certainly these big companies think it's going to be a nothing burger, because if you look at the way the markets have reacted, there's no big fall in the huge companies that would be liable to pay these taxes if they were finally caught up. So whether or not it's going to be a failing of, capitals around the world coming to a consensus and actually getting it through, or whether those big companies are just relying on the fact that their accountants, their lawyers, will be cleverer and more expensive than those owned by the cities, and therefore they'll be able to find a new loophole to get around it.
One final point on this, Ana Navarro, Pedro. You get the sense with this G7, whether or not they accomplish what they do, that at least it's focusing the conversation on what the post-pandemic world will look like.
You might have that sense. Of course, if we are making any progress regarding taxation of multinationals, and if you are stopping their run to low-tax countries, it's just because the coffers are empty everywhere because of the COVID. Because otherwise, I couldn't see such an alliance of willing nations to really want to tax, because it has been on the table for a long time to tax multinationals, like most of them American, but not only. And secondly, how is the money going to be distributed if ever gets levied? Is it going to stay within the G7 countries, or is it going to be distributed to those who
Well,
most
in the
need
country
it?
where the companies do business is the idea.
It's the idea. Okay.
All
We'll
right.
see.
We'll see. Speaking of COVID, like it or not, here it comes. Bolivia's national team arriving in the central Brazilian city of Goiânia ahead of the Copa America. The Copa America delayed by a year. First it was dropped by Colombia because of social protest, then by Argentina because of COVID, and now taking place even though the pandemic is still raging in Brazil.
The trends that we're seeing are clear. Across our region, this year has been worse than last year. In many places, infections are higher now than at any point during this pandemic.
Los organizadores deberían reconsiderar o postergar el evento hasta que las condiciones sean más favorables y cuando el riesgo esté dentro del límite de lo manejable.
So, Jamil Shad, you hear that call from the Pan American Health Organization, the WHO's regional body, if you will. calling for a postponement. Why is this tournament still happening, though?
Yeah, well, first of all, François, this is an outrageous event, basically a blow to so many families who lost their loved ones. 500,000 deaths in Brazil, almost 500,000 deaths in Brazil, and still an event that obviously has a political purpose. What is the political purpose of Copa America? It's basically to show that the country is living a sort of normality. This is part of a behavior by President Bolsonaro, basically to deny the gravity of, first of all, of the virus, but also basically to say to people, basically, well, the country is back in normality, denying the fact, denying the numbers. We're still having 90,000 new cases per day. We still have over 2,000 deaths per day, but still Copa America will be played. It's obviously a political gesture by a government that needs or is willing basically to show to the population a normality that basically is a fiction.
Yeah, and even though the national team was against from Brazil, there was this awkwardly worded statement by the Seleção, made sure to insist they were not boycotting and to pin the blame on continental organizers, CONMEBOL, not Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro. We're against organizing the Copa America, but we will never say no to the national team. Let's listen to Brazil and Paris Saint-Germain defender Marquinhos.
I believe that everyone is entitled to an opinion. I believe that everyone has the freedom to express political views. But I believe this isn't the time or place to do so, especially while wearing the Brazilian shirt. If someone wants to express their political views, do it at home, in your personal time.
You heard, Ana Navarro Pedro, you heard Jamil Shad say this is all about politics, and then you hear Marquinhos saying it's nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, right. They saw, they heard the bullets, whistling by their ears when they said that, because immediately it became a question of their, how do you say, the soccer coach. The coach... Tite, he said that it wasn't a very good idea, and for many reasons, even for soccer, not only because they are doing the runoffs for the World Championship, and they are
they're running late with their World Cup qualifiers.
So everything is against it, and the COVID and everything, and and then he said something like that, and immediately he was made like the left in Brazil made him the main opponent to Jair Bolsonaro. So the extreme right-wing supporters of Bolsonaro started making this a very political issue. All the people around the Confederation of Football, of Soccer in Brazil, are very next to Bolsonaro right now. So the players knew that they were putting their fingers on something very, 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 very pricky, and they pulled out because they knew that this could really get out of hand in Brazil.
Jamil Shad, it's not just the organizers and the coaches that are, or the federation that's close to Bolsonaro. A lot of the players. Why is that?
Some of them.
Absolutely true. Many players have basically even declared their support for Bolsonaro. It is true that many of them have a very similar, let's say, background as the supporters of Bolsonaro, basically an evangelical background, a background that has links basically to some of the very conservative aspects of this story. Now, let's be very clear here. When these players say, we will not politicize the Brazilian shirt, they're basically opening the path for the politicization, but not by themselves, by football officials and by the president themselves. So actually, when they say, we don't want to politicize anything here, it is basically a political position. By basically not taking a position, what they actually did is basically a complicity with all that is happening in Brazil at this point of time. It is a very sad story. It puts the Brazilian team, the yellow shirt that is basically recognizable everywhere in the world, in a very difficult position. Today, it has been kidnapped by the extreme right as their own symbol.
And on that score, let me ask you, you have major sponsors, MasterCard, the brewer Ambev, which have pulled out for this Copa America. Is that a wise calculation on their part?
Absolutely wise, because you have part of the population really very angry with this situation. You could argue, well, Euro Cup is happening, so why not Copa America? Well, very different situations. You still have a government in Brazil that denies basically that the virus is as serious as it is, and has no plan to basically get out of this crisis. When they decide, after having their neighbors saying, well, we don't want this competition here. And then basically one of the epicenters of the global crisis says, oh, we're ready to host it. Obviously, it makes a lot of people very angry. This relationship with the national team and fans, this is a relationship that is very complicated at this moment of time. Many people basically asking themselves questions whether they should even support the national team during the competition.
MasterCard and all the other sponsors who are pulling out, they are pulling out their logos from the competition, which is very unusual, but they are not pulling out the money they've put as sponsors. And that is extremely interesting, because the problem as well for this Copa America to be played this year, it's because CONMEBOL, the Confederation of South American Football or Soccer, has spent a lot of money. It's going to lose a lot of money with this, and there is right now 120 million, as they say, dollars on the table that they will get if they go ahead with it, and that they would lose if they didn't go ahead with the Copa.
Gosh, Nico Heinz, replace the words Copa America with Olympics or even Euro 2020. Is it the same story?
Yeah, I think it's all a bit rich for us to be sitting around lecturing South America when supposedly the Olympics is about to take place in a month. And by my watch, we're about an hour away from kickoff in the Euros, which not only, unlike Copa America, is going to have like crowds. There's going to be 15,000 people in Rome, where a huge proportion of the population still isn't vaccinated.
A stadium's going to be full in Hungary.
Full capacity crowd. Yeah, full capacity. So I'm not quite sure how big their main stadium is, but 60,000 people? I don't know how many Hungarians are vaccinated. And the craziness of it is, not only are we having these matches with big crowds, but the teams are then going to be flying from one country to the other country to the other country. Groups of fans are going to be going from one country to another country. I mean, it's complete madness. So, yeah, we can all point at Bolsonaro, who has been arguably the very worst offender when it comes to idiotic dictators and COVID. But, Europe's doing just the same. And there's no good in saying, oh, well, yes, but, the rates are down in Europe. Yeah, they are. But we still carried on playing the Champions League all over the last year. And all sorts of international friendlies and international matches. So, Brazil isn't kind of on its own when it comes to crazy decisions. And the fact is, people love sport so much that people are willing to risk potentially tens of thousands of lives to keep it going.
Before we go, the slap heard all around France. Let's not read more into this idiotic and violent act than what it is. Those words from Emmanuel Macron after a 28-year-old from the crowd slapped the French president during a Tuesday visit to a village in the southeastern Rhône Valley. Well, in an expedited proceeding, Damien Tarel, that's his name, sentenced Thursday to 4 months behind bars. He's a fan of Japanese martial arts and medieval lore. He yelled "Down with Macronia," as well as a royalist chant when he was apprehended. In court, he talked of his support for the yellow vests and his disdain for the current French president. I don't like him, and when he approached, it surprised me. I saw his lying, friendly look that wanted to make a potential supporter out of me. Richard Verly, what was your first reaction when you heard this story?
I was not surprised. I thought that this would happen during Macron tour of France, the tour that he's doing now, ahead of his next electoral campaign at the end of the year and beginning of 2022. Because the problem of Macron, and I believe he knows it by heart, is that since he became president, he's not been able, he may have not even tried, he's not been able to calm down the anger in France. And he even fueled this anger by some of his behavior. But in this precise case, and that's what I wrote in an editorial for Le Temps, for my newspaper, I said that we should also look at his audacity in a way, because he was brave enough to continue going to the people, facing the people. Even apparently his bodyguards were not completely feeling at ease with that. He was going ahead of the bodyguards to the French people. He knew and he knows there is a risk, but he assumed that risk. And I would say that it's not a good sign for French democracy in a way, but it's also a positive sign to see a president, despite knowing that he's disliked, he still wants to meet and to talk with his people. So on that one, I would fare Macron, with some kind of courage.
Do you have trouble explaining to your readers in Visao that there is this strong hostility by a certain proportion of the French population, even though he's still the favorite right now to win re-election?
Yes, there was some trouble. The Gilets jaunes or the Yellow Vest movement helped to make it understandable the large divide in France. But people still in my country have trouble believing that these positions are so radicalized in France. There is so much anger politically and socially in this country, and that it can just go up to physical violence. So yes, there is a little bit of difficulty. You have to go to history and explain. But at the same time, Monsieur Macron, the president, he's already on campaign, and on campaign you do take risks. And England, Portugal, I don't know, Switzerland, of course not. But you can have some heated, some really, really hot moments.
And the outcome was not bad for Macron, by the way, because all political leaders came on condemning this
and agreeing with him not to make too much of it.
Exactly. So,
Jamil Chad, let me ask you: does this all seem a little bit tame? After all, Bolsonaro, when he was on the campaign trail, got stabbed.
No, absolutely. I do think that this is worrying because you see the polarization being translated into violence somehow. Yes, it's a minor case. Yes, it is not something that threatened his life. But as we've seen in other places of the world, this polarization, it doesn't stop only in social media or in a tweet or in a comment. It can have a translation into reality, and that's the danger. There's no such a thing as a virtual attack. There's an attack, full stop, and then eventually it transforms into a real slap or even something else.
We always seem to be surprised, Nico Hines, but we looked up all the precedents. Helmut Kohl had to be restrained by his own bodyguards when he was egged trying to punch the guy who did it. And of course, the deputy prime minister of Britain in his day, John Prescott, decking a guy who'd thrown an egg at him.
Yeah, he became a great hero, I think, after doing that. And I don't think this is going to do Macron any harm at the end of the day. I know that we're all taking it very seriously, and of course we should, because it was an act of violence. But if you look on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, everyone's finding it absolutely hilarious, And it was such a kind of sharp slapping sound that I think this will be a meme and a clip that we see and hear for years and years and years to remind us of, there are some moments when politicians get brought back down to earth by an unruly member of the public.
Is 4 months in prison the right amount, you think?
It's not.
Is that what he's going to get? No, that sounds like a lot to me. At the end of the day, he wasn't trying to damage him in any severe way. It wasn't a threat to his life. If you do that to somebody in the street, I don't think you would get a 4-month sentence if they didn't happen to be the president of France.
It is the Président de la République, though. Nico Hines, I want to thank you so much for joining us from London. Jamil Shad for being with us from Geneva. Anna Navarro, Pedro, Richard Verli. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.